please accept my Dandavat Pranams. Hare Krishna and hello to everybody. Today we have a meeting on which Mahayogi Prabhu will tell us about the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Mahayogi Prabhu is a truth seeker who is on this way, who has been on this way for more than 45 years. He is one of the compilers and editors of the great 5 volumes by Sridhar Maharaj, and now he is also continuing to work with scriptures and texts and with translation, and he is also publishing new books which are devoted to spiritual topics. And so today he's with us and we are very happy. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Om Jnana Timrandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshuru Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanabhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Bharatam Rita Sarvasvam Vishnu Vaktrad Vinishritam Gita Gangodakam Pitva Punar Janma Navidyate. One who drinks the waters of the Ganges attains salvation. So what to speak of one who drinks the nectar of Bhagavad Gita? Bhagavad Gita is the essential nectar of the Mahabharata, spoken by Lord Sri Krishna himself, the original Vishnu. Sarvo Panishado Gavo Dagda Gopala Nandana Parto Vatsa Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitamritam Mahat. The Gita Upanishad, or Bhagavad Gita, is the essence of all the Upanishads, and it's like a cow. Lord Krishna, who is Gopalanandana, is milking this cow. Arjuna is like a calf, and learned scholars and pure devotees are to drink the nectarine milk of the Bhagavad Gita. This is by Shankaracharya. This is the Gita Mahatmyam that precedes his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, is written by Shankaracharya. And of course, Shankaracharya is the great advocate of oneness or non-dualism. And our school, or the Vaishnava school, we believe in a personal God. The followers of Shankara mostly believe in an impersonal force. But here at the beginning of the Gita, Shankaracharya is giving his due to Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So some people believe that even Shankaracharya was probably a devotee. But he took it upon himself to reinstall the Vedas, as it were, in Indian culture, because at that time in India, Buddhism had been on the ascent for some hundreds of years. And when Shankaracharya came along, I don't want to say he defeated Buddhism, but in effect, he sent Buddhism away, and Buddhism went to China and other countries after Shankaracharya. There are many reasons for this, but many attribute that to the refutation of Buddhism given by Shankaracharya. Since Buddhism really promotes the idea of zero, whereas Shankaracharya promoted the idea of the infinite. And Shankaracharya returned the Vedas, the gods, the Puranas, the ancient scriptures of India back to the people of India, where Buddha had given only his precepts and the 8 noble truths. The people of India loved the Bhagavad Gita and Krishna. And so that's a great contribution that Shankaracharya made. And in his own words, he says, Ekam Shastram Devaki Putra Gitam, Eko Devo Devaki Putra Eva, Eko Mantras, Tasya Namani, Jani, Karmanyekam, Rasya Devasya Seva. And Srila Prabhupada Bhaktivedanta Swami comments, in this present day, people are very much eager to have one scripture, one God, one religion, and one occupation. Therefore, Ekam Shastra Devaki Putra Gitam, let there be one scripture only, one common scripture in the world, Bhagavad Gita. Eko Devo Devaki Putra Eva, let there be one God for the whole world, Sri Krishna. Eko Mantras, Tasya Namani Eva, one hymn, one mantra, one prayer, the chanting of his holy name, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Karmya Bekam, Tasya Devasya Seva, and let there be one work only, the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So on the basis of this Gita Mahatmyam given by Shankaracharya, it's easy to argue that perhaps Shankaracharya himself was a kind of a hidden Vaishnava whose real purpose was to, by promoting the message of the Gita, promoting the worship of Krishna himself. And we'll talk more about Shankaracharya's ideas and the ideas of Buddha. Sridhar Maharaj once pointed out, it's not necessary. It's not necessary that one go from a neutral position to the analysis of Samkhya and then the analysis of Buddha, and then progress through the eightfold noble path given by Buddha to the yoga system of Patanjali and the teachings of Shankaracharya. And then having analyzed that, come to the conclusion that Vaishnavism is the superior path, and then gradually proceed on the different steps of sadhana bhakti. One may go directly to the idea of Krishna Seva, bypassing all these intellectual puzzles and enigmas and games. After all, we're not interested in knowledge per se or intellectualism. We're interested in faith. And in a sense, knowledge is poison. But then again, an expert doctor or physician may have on his shelf a number of different bottles of poison, but he knows that this particular poison is good for a rattlesnake bite, and this particular poison is good for a heart attack. So these things can be administered according to the problems of the patient. And in this way, the comparison is made between a doctor and a preacher. As preachers of Krishna consciousness, sometimes we need support and a certain amount of argument in order to try to convince others, if not to worship Krishna, at least to accept our faith as being as valid as any other faith in the world. So you please forgive me if I talk about some different arguments that are being presented by different schools. My original goal in doing these talks was to try to cover one chapter in 1 hour every week. But we've found that because the message of the Bhagavad Gita is Upanishadic, it means that it's very dense. Every verse is very pregnant with meaning. And as Srila Sridhar Maharaj used to say, when connotation increases, denotation decreases. And when denotation decreases, connotation increases. This means that if you have a very short shloka, sometimes you need a whole book to explain the shloka. That's the difference between the Upanishads and the Puranas. For example, in the Puranas, the story of Ajamil is told. And we get the history of Ajamil, how he was a very pious Brahmin. Later, he becomes seduced by different temptations and becomes involved in abominable behavior. And finally, at the end of his life, when the Yamadutas come from him, the messengers of the Lord of Death come to drag him down to hell, he remembers the name of his son and vibrates the holy name of Krishna, and this way he's saved. So it's a very nice story. It's a long story, and it occupies a big section of the 6th canto of the Bhagavatam. But the point of the story is what you remember at the time of death will determine your destination. So Krishna says that in the Bhagavad Gita. Yam yam vapi smaran bhavan. Whatever you remember at the time of death will determine your destination after death. So in the Gita, that's given us a very short shloka. It's only half a line. But in the Bhagavad Purana, that's explained in great depth as a story. So the Bhagavad Gita is more about connotation, and that's why we have so many commentaries or denotation. My point is it's very difficult to really summarize an entire chapter in 45 minutes. So some of the members of our Sangha here asked me to take a little bit more time and not trying to force an entire chapter into an hour. So I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. So again, thank you for giving me a little bit of latitude. So it's difficult to cover properly all the ideas given in the Gita. Krishna, as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the origin of all the worlds. And just as he's expert in conjuring different multitudes of spiritual Vaikunthas, he's also expert in conjuring different worlds of understanding here in the Gita. And I think I would be remiss not to go into some of these in depth. So devotees often find themselves trying to explain one of the ideas given in the Gita. But in order to explain that, you have to put down some building blocks. Or you have to go in and out of a number of different ideas. So I find myself weaving in and out of different concepts like karma, gyan, yogi, bhakti, the eightfold path. But I hope that as I'm speaking here, you can help me not to lose the thread of Krishna's argument. And here in the 6th chapter, the eightfold path is discussed, which is sort of interesting because most modern yoga systems appeal to the eightfold path originally explained by Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras. But Patanjali comes a few hundred years after the Bhagavad Gita. And the fact that Krishna mentions the yoga system in the 6th chapter reveals that this system is a very ancient one and predates the sutras of Patanjali. And because it's mentioned here, it deserves a particular amount of attention. Since it seems to be so much discussed. Often people, if we say we're yogis, they want to know about how to sit properly and how to eat properly. My Gurudev gave me the name Mahayogi, and it's very funny to me because I don't look like a yogi. I'm a little on the fat side. So I remember when I came back from India, and my Indian friends would ask me, and your name? I would say, Mahayogi. And they would look at me and say, no, sir, you cannot be Mahayogi. I cannot call you Yogi, perhaps. We can say Yogi, but Mahayogi, no. But I asked Srila Sridhar Maharaj, what's the meaning of this name? Bhaktivedanta Mahayogi. He said it means one whose Vidan or rule is that Bhakti is the highest yoga. So yoga really means path. And in the Bhagavad Gita, we find Krishna describing a number of different paths towards the same truth, which is dedication or devotion to God or bhakti. But again, since the eightfold path is being discussed here, I thought it would be good to touch on that. Now, even Buddhism has an eightfold path, which appears to borrow something from the Hindu tradition. So I just like a little bit of latitude or room to move around these different concepts. Krishna mentions aspects of the eightfold yoga path thousands of years before Buddha walked the earth. So I'm making the assumption that the Vedic version of Ashtanga Yoga predates the Buddhist idea of the eightfold path. And we'll see that there are very valuable precepts in both of these paths, which is why these teachings have lasted thousands of years in all different traditions proceeding out of India. Of course, on a higher level, we'll see that these are superseded by the ninefold path of surrender, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, and so on, given in the Bhakti tradition. So let's get started. Krishna says, Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Anashrita Karma Phalam Karyam Karma Karoti Jaha Sasanjasi Cha Jogi Cha Na Niragnir Na Chakriya The word cha is used a lot in the Bhagavad Gita. It means and, or sometimes and so on. So he says, sannyasi chajogi cha, na niragnir, na cha, kriya. Kriya means work or duty. It's related to karma. You've heard of kriya yoga. So Krishna says, one who is unattached to the fruits of his work and who works as he's obligated is in the renounced order of life. And he is the true mystic, not he who lights no fire and performs no work. So here, Krishna is recapitulating what he just finished saying in the 5th chapter. And as we've seen in the 5th chapter, Krishna explains that through the process of karma yoga, or giving up one's work and sacrifice, the human soul may be released from material bondage. And he's making the point that you don't progress simply through renunciation. Here, sannyas means renunciation. That's not the purport of the Bhagavad Gita, to give everything up. Because there's a certain cycle of bhoga tyag, which means you enjoy until you become disgusted with enjoyment. And then you renounce enjoyment for a while until the renunciation becomes dry. And then you want to enjoy again. Well, this is not real self-realization. And Krishna here says, just by giving up your work, you're not making progress. On the other hand, Krishna conscious people are not interested in enjoyment as an end to itself. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Nadanam na janam na sundaram, kavitam va jagadisha kamaye, mama janmani janmani ishvare, bhavatad bhaktira haituki tvai. I'm not interested in dhanam, which means money, gold, not janam. Janam means people. So we're not interested in getting a number of followers on Instagram, or getting a number of followers on Facebook, or having disciples. Na sundarim. Sundarim means beauty, but in this sense, it means beautiful women or beautiful members of the opposite sex. If you're a woman, you may be interested in men. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is saying sex, drugs, rock and roll, all of those has no appeal. Kavitam va jagadisha kamaya. I'm not interested in being a kavi, a great poet, or having a reputation as an intellectual, or even jagadisha, controlling the world, being a master of the universe, having power. Kamaye. This sort of desire doesn't appeal to me. Mama janmani janmani ishvare, bhavatad bhaktir, haituki tvai. But all I want, birth after birth, is a chance to serve, to get a position among the devotees, to participate in the kirtan. So even if I go to hell, I want to play the drum in hell and chant Hare Krishna. Doesn't matter. People often ask about the Pandavas in hell. It doesn't matter if we're in heaven or in hell. All we want to do is serve Krishna and chant Hare Krishna. And if Krishna sends me to hell or a hellish condition, that doesn't affect me. We see on this earth planet so many hellish conditions, but even surrounded by the hell of karmic society with a pandemia, war, hate, anger. It doesn't matter. We're interested in chanting Hare Krishna and serving God.
Они потом бывают в конце выкидывают пластиковые. А вот эти штучки.
Yeah, is there a question? I'm sorry.
Sorry, simply somebody occasionally turned on the sound.
All right.
Sorry. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, I'm aware that anything I say may be used against me in a court of law, and I'm sure this talk can be used as evidence of something in the future. But I'm just trying to represent the message of Bhagavad Gita, which is a message of peace. So, anyways, in the 5th chapter, Krishna talks about karma yoga, how to become released from material bondage. And still, this idea of doing your work for God is not an appealing idea. I remember when I was a young man, there was a very popular book called The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. And all the girls read this book at my high school. I went to high school in Hollywood. And I thought, well, I need to understand the girls. So I want to read this book. And maybe if I read that book and I tell them, hey, I'm reading the same book, that will help me with the girls. And so I picked up The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. I still have a copy over here somewhere. Yeah, here it is. And somewhere in there, they ask the prophet, tell us about work. And he says, work is the active principle of love. And when I read that, I thought, this is terrible. I'm not going to read this book because as a teenage boy, I did not like the idea of work. So I put that book away. But 1,000 years later, here I am in my 60s, and I understand what he meant. Work is the active principle of love, because if you love someone, you're willing to do some work for them. And that's kind of the meaning of the 5th chapter. But a lot of people are not happy with it, that they want a different method, something more powerful, something more mystical. So there are those who seek a more internal process of self-discovery. And here in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna begins unfolding the process of meditation by which one may contemplate the Atma and the Paramatma and enter into a higher state of consciousness called samadhi. So, while those who practice karma yoga or selfless action really will become absorbed in the same kind of higher consciousness that Krishna describes as samadhi, there are those for whom meditation is more attractive. We're not all attracted to exactly the same path. The poet William Blake once commented that the same law for the lamb and the lion is tyranny. The law for the lion is to eat the lamb. But the law for the lamb is to escape the lion. So you can't have the same law for everyone. There's no absolute equality. After all, absolute equality leads us to the conclusion of Shankaracharya that we're all one. So different people have different approaches. There's 9 different processes of devotional service: Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atmanivedanam. Some people are attracted to Archan. Others are not. They love Shravanam and Kirtanam. This doesn't mean that the followers of hearing the Bhagavatam are any less than those who worship the deity with incense. It's just there's different kinds of bhajan, different kinds of love of God, different paths. So in the 6th chapter here, Krishna describes more the path of meditation. All these practitioners will ultimately reach the higher goal and discover service to God and dedication of Bhakti Yoga, either by offering their works in the fire of sacrifice or by offering their mind through the fire of meditation. They achieve faith or develop faith through association with the higher sadhus. Work or karma, knowledge or gyan by itself is not enough to really attain the goal. The goal is love of God, and that's only possible through faith. But through these different practices, one develops faith. Someone who pursues transcendental knowledge will come in contact with a guru. And since the guru, the real Acharyavan Purusho Veda, the real guru who personifies the Vedas, will have a touch of bhakti at the very least, if not be a Mahabhagavat who embodies divine love. Connection with the proper guru will help one develop faith. So the pursuit of transcendental knowledge by connection with a guru will bring one in contact with sadhus who have shraddha. In this way, shraddha develops. And the same is true of the path of karma yoga, by dedicating one's work to Krishna with the help of a guru. So faith is the real point, and faith will set you free. And how faith develops into divine love exactly is discussed more in the 7th chapter. But in the 6th chapter, Krishna is elaborating on the yoga system as it was practiced by the ancients. So the title of the chapter is Dhyan, or Dhyana Yoga. Again, it's important to keep in mind that all these Sanskrit terms like dhyan or yoga, they had a different meaning thousands of years ago than they do today. Really, the modern so-called yoga movement began in the 1800s and 80s when, or 90s, I'm not absolutely sure of the date, but there was a very famous yogi from India named Vivekananda Swami, who visited the United States. He was at the Chicago World Exposition. Someone will know the date. And on the basis of his teachings, yoga began to become popular in the United States, especially in California. There's a Vedanta Society in California that was established well over 100 years ago. In fact, when I was a little boy, I had an Irish nurse. My mother was away on some business when I was about 2 years old. And she hired an Irish nurse to take care of me. And the nurse was an adherent of the Vedanta Yoga Society. And she used to whisper Vedic mantras in my ear when I was about 2 years old, which is kind of strange. So anyway, the yoga movements that came to the United States began becoming more and more and more popular. And particularly, there's one school called Iyengar Yoga, based on the teachings of BKS Iyengar, that became popular. And he wrote a commentary on the Yoga Sutras. But nowadays, yoga really has not so much in common with the Bhagavad Gita and the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Iyengar, to his credit, it was, his middle name is Krishna something, I can't remember. To his credit, advocates following all 8 of the limbs of Ashtanga Yoga, which are asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyan, yama, niyama, and samadhi. So yama and niyama, it means rules and regulations. And the idea is follow the rules and regulations of ordinary human beings as given in the Vedas. For example, no meat, fish, or eggs, no intoxication, gambling, illicit promiscuous sex. Concentrate the mind, follow a moral path, follow dharma. But Americans are not so much interested in yama and niyama. And for that reason, it's really hard to characterize what they do as yoga. You can go to the local supermarket and you'll find advertisements for everything from integral yoga to there's naked yoga, flying yoga, hot yoga, laughing yoga, dancing yoga, which sort of avoids the real meaning of yoga. The root of the word yoga in Sanskrit, it means to join together. It represents the yoke that two oxen have. Oxen are yoked together in a team. So joining or union is there. Any practice which advances our union with divinity is a form of yoga. But on another level, it also means how far can an ox team walk in a day? In other words, you put the yoke on 2 bulls and then let them walk as far as they can walk. That's called a yojana. And it may be somewhere between 5 miles and 8 miles on a given day. So a yoking, it means a journey. So the word yoga classically also means path. And so even Iyengar and his system of the Patanjali Eightfold Path points out that if you're not seeking a higher understanding of what it means to be human and spiritual, then you're not a yogi in the true sense of the word. I wanted to read a little bit from, here's from this is from the Yoga Sutras. It's a different translation by someone named Bryant. But he says, while the old Vedic sacrificial cult from which yoga emerged no longer defines our modern religious or cultural horizons, a number of the traditions that it spawned, such as yoga, remain. Modern societies no longer offer a sacrifice to the gods, recite Vedic hymns, or pour ghee into the fire in order to maintain material goals. But we share many of the same attitudes as the Vedic ritualists, that the goal of life is the pursuit of ever-increasing levels of material abundance and sensual gratification, and we manipulate our environment to attain this goal in other more damaging ways. From a certain perspective, one may say that the only difference between our modern goals of life and those of the ancient Vedas is the technologies we use in attempting to attain them. They tried to achieve the good life through technologies of mantra and ritual, and we use machine-based industrial technologies. Our modern world has universalized, idolized, and mass-produced consumerism, the indulgence of the senses and the mind as the highest and most desirable goal of life. From the perspective of the yoga tradition, our vrittis, the restlessness of the mind caused by ignorance and desire, are out of control. And so proportionately to our material attachments, according to yoga, a sense of malaise and dissatisfaction is engendered, since, as the Gita informs us, desire is never satisfied and burns like fire. It is thus our eternal enemy. According to almost all schools of Indic thought, including Buddhism and Jainism, the more we desire, the more we are frustrated. The more we are frustrated, the more we strive to remove our frustration with more sensory stimuli. And the more we strive, the more we damage ourselves and our environment and perpetuate our samsaric existence. It is in the critique of this mindset of consumption that Patanjali claims to offer an alternative that remains perennially relevant to human existence. But it is a solution that requires an abandonment of the consumer mentality by the practice of the full 8 limbs of yoga, beginning with yamas and niyamas. Without these, attempts to perfect the 3rd limb of yoga, asanas, postures, are simply physical gymnastics. So this is from a book on yoga explaining the Vedic sutras. In other words, the asanas are useful, very important for good health. But the asanas or different postures of yoga are especially designed to be used in conjunction with the other 7 aspects of Ashtanga yoga. Without these, attempts to perfect the 3rd limb of yoga, asana, postures are simply physical gymnastics. To equate the practice and purpose of yoga with this limb alone is to miss the whole point of Patanjali's system, particularly and ironically, if this is done with a view of improving the sensual prowess of the body and mind in order to maximize physical and mental pleasure. So it's very strange that in the West, everything is technique, everything is technology, and the purpose of technology is to advance our sensual pleasure. But this ignores the idea that in the end, sensual pleasure is doomed because we all die. It doesn't matter how sexy your body is today, in 30 or 40 years, it will disintegrate. The flesh will return to the earth, and the blood will return to the water, and the air will return to the air. And ashes to ashes, dust to dust. No matter how beautiful a young body is, an old body is not really very appealing. So birth, death, old age, and disease are inevitable for everyone. Why should we believe that yoga will make you perfect forever so that you can go on having sex forever? Frank Sinatra famously injected monkey glands before the invention of Viagra so that he could remain virile and continue to have sex with young starlets, even in his 70s. Now we have Viagra, which makes that possible. But sexual reproduction is really for the purpose of having a family. And at some point in one's life, the idea of pursuing members of the opposite sex for pleasure becomes a bit ridiculous. If we see old men chasing young women, we think, why is this grandfather running after a cheerleader? There's something sad about that. So the Western idea that you can remain young forever by taking drugs and practicing yoga has nothing to do with the purpose of the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. Yoga is for truth seekers. So if one is not sincerely seeking a higher understanding of what it means to be human and spiritual, one is not a yogi in the true sense. So as Krishna explores the different methods of truth seeking, he shows us different paths: karma, jnana, ashtanga, and bhakti. These are different approaches to divinity. One who dedicates his work to God follows karma yoga. One who meditates using transcendental knowledge follows jnana. Ashtanga yoga, which is seen in the 6th chapter, is a stricter path which aims at samadhi through a combination of austerity, meditation, practice, bodily discipline, and focus. But the goal of these different practices, according to Krishna himself, is to develop divine love towards God. So here at the beginning of the 6th chapter, Krishna explains that one who's free from attachment to the results of his work is both a sannyasi and a yogi. Karma yoga tries to realize salvation through perfect action, and one who knows the laws of cause and effect, of action and reaction, realizes that bad action has consequences. And we try to purify our action by avoiding sin and accepting piety. But this is still a little superficial. One strives for perfection through proper action and good deeds. Ethical action is the basis of many different religions then. The idea is do something good and avoid a bad reaction. But this is not very deep. But this is where Krishna's message is at its most universal, since karma yoga attempts to realize salvation through perfect action. One who knows the laws of cause and effect, action and reaction, understands that bad action has consequences and seeks to purify karma by avoiding sin and accepting piety. But this is superficial since it doesn't really liberate us from the circle of birth and death. And through action alone, we will not attain the highest salvation. The soul itself exists on a plane above the material forces of action and reaction, and spiritual knowledge is required for a more perfect union with God. So this kind of yoga path, the path of knowledge, is called jnana. And we've discussed this before. Patanjali, I have a strange personal relationship with Patanjali because his teachings were advanced by Paramahansa Yogananda. And when I was a little boy, I used to visit Sunset Beach, not far from my home in the Pacific Palisades. And every Saturday we'd take a shortcut through the grounds of this park, which was the Self-Realization Fellowship founded by Paramahansa Yogananda. And Elvis Presley was a follower of Paramahansa Yogananda, very secretly. So Paramahansa Yogananda, he writes that Patanjali's date is unknown, although many scholars assign him to the 2nd century before Christ, maybe about 2,200 years ago. And the Yoga Sutras represent, in a series of brief aphorisms, the condensed essence of the exceedingly vast and intricate science of yoga in such a beautiful, clear, and concise way that generations of scholars have acknowledged the Yoga Sutras as the most ancient work on yoga. So, Krishna says, Yang sangyasam iti prakur yogam tam vidipandava nya hi asanyasta sankalpo yogi bhavati kaschana. He says, what is called renunciation, you should know to be the same as yoga, or linking oneself with the Supreme, O son of Pandu. For one can never become a yogi unless he renounces the desire for sense gratification. Arurukshor muner yogam karma karanamuchate yoga rudhasya tasyaiva shamakaranamuchate. For one who is a neophyte in the Eightfold Yoga system, work is said to be the means. But for one who is already elevated in yoga, cessation of all material activities is said to be the means. Yadahi nendriyarteshu na karmas vanu sajjate karma sankalpa sanyasi yoga rudas tadochite. A person is said to be elevated in yoga when, having renounced all material desires, he neither acts for sense gratification nor engages in fruitive activities. Udhare atmanam natmanam avasadayat atmaiva yatmano bandur atmaiva ripur atmana. One must deliver oneself by the help of his mind and not degrade himself. The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul and his enemy as well. So this is an important verse we often hear. It's interesting also the word Atma here has different meanings. It's translated here to mean the mind. Atma sometimes means mind, intelligence, and false ego. So Krishna says the mind can be your friend, or the mind can be your enemy, depending on how you engage the mind. Bandhurat matmanas tasya jainat maivatmanajata anatmanas tu shatrutve vartetat maiva shatruvat. The word shatru means enemy. So again, he's repeated the word atma 4 times in the shloka. And bandhu means friend. So bandhu atmat manas tasya. The mind can be your friend. The mind can be your enemy, depending on whether you control the mind or not. So how to control the mind. And mind control here does not mean brainwashing. It means involving the mind in service. If you're thinking about service to Krishna, then the mind is properly engaged, whereas the mind involved in purely sensual activities will lead you astray. So we say the mind is the devil's workshop. When the mind runs after the temporary likes and dislikes of the senses, it's uncontrolled. The senses give us input. It's hot, it's cold, this is sour, this is sweet. Whereas the mind weighs things. I like this, I don't like that. So when the mind is simply going in the direction of what I like and what I don't like, it's being controlled by the senses. The mind and senses are often compared to the horses of the chariot and the driver, the reins, like that. The comparison is made with the chariot. So the horses of the chariot are the senses, the eyes, the ears, sense of touch, aroma. So if we're simply being led in one direction or another by the impulses of the senses, and the mind runs after what I like, then where is our intelligence? The intelligence is supposed to try to control the mind. And when the mind is not controlled, we become lost in chasing the fugitive impulses of the senses. And this way we forget our spiritual nature, and our ego becomes more and more involved in material life. So controlling the mind through yoga, this is the purpose of yoga in a very real sense. In other words, we have all these different techniques in yoga. The purpose of these techniques is to help control the mind, and this way achieve fullness and spiritual satisfaction. After all, there's another concept that we hear called prayas and shreyas. And prayas means what's immediately satisfying, and shreyas is what is your long-term satisfaction. For example, I like chocolate, but I had a friend of mine, for Christmas, they gave her all different kinds of chocolate candies. And so she just stuffed her face and ate chocolate until she couldn't stop. She just ate and ate chocolate. And then what happened? She became very sick and had to go to the hospital and have her stomach pumped because chocolate is an irritant. So people like drugs and alcohol to the point that they become addicted, and they take more and more drugs and alcohol and burn out their brains when they're 20 years old or 25, because the drugs and the alcohol make them feel like a Superman. But running after your immediate sensual pleasure is destructive. So Krishna says that one must elevate oneself by the mind and not degrade himself. For one who controls the mind is the best friend and will help with self-fulfillment. But when the self fails to control the mind becomes the enemy of true self-interest. That's a good way of translating that. Atma also means the self. So you can take the self as sort of the whole condition of personal being, mind, intelligence, false ego, or as Freud analyzed it, the ego, the superego, and the id, however you look at the mind, when this is uncontrolled, you become your own worst enemy. So the purpose of yoga, in a sense, is to conquer the mind. But one needs to be careful and balanced in doing so. And for this reason, we have the help of the guru. Jitatmana prashantasya paramatma samahitaha sitoshna shukadukeshu tata mana pamanayo. For one who has conquered the mind, the Paramatma is already reached, for he has attained tranquility. To such a man, happiness and distress, heat and cold, honor and dishonor are all the same. When I say it's dangerous or it's difficult, my point is you can't reject happiness artificially. You can't come to this stage artificially. And if somebody says, oh, enjoy your birthday, you can't tell them, enjoy? I never enjoy anything. Enjoyment? Don't tell me to enjoy. Or if you say good morning to a devotee, sometimes they'll say, we don't say good morning because good and bad, we're equal in both. And this is kind of artificial. So the same is true about the ego. You cannot artificially destroy the ego. It's very dangerous to try to do that. But through the process of yoga, meditation, really bhakti and dedication, one will develop a higher sense of ego as a servant of Krishna. Jnana vijnana triptatma kutashto vijitendriya yukta iti uchate yogi samaloshtashma kanchanaha. A person is said to be established in self-realization and is called a yogi when he is fully satisfied by virtue of acquired knowledge and realization. Such a person is situated in transcendence and is self-controlled. He sees everything, whether it be pebbles, stones, or gold, as the same. So again, jnana vijnana triptatma, one who develops this sort of vision is a real mystic. He's equal in looking at gold and pebbles as the same thing. Well, that's a very difficult platform to realize, but it's not impossible. I think Srila Sridhar Maharaj, to him, a pebble or a piece of gold would be viewed equally. He wasn't especially enamored by the gold, and he wasn't especially repulsed by the pebble. If the pebble was a tiny shalagram shila, then it would be worshipable. And if the gold was to be employed in some materialistic practice, then it wasn't so appreciated. But to achieve this sort of balance, it's not easy. Prabhupada comments, book knowledge without realization of the supreme truth is useless. This is stated as follows. Ata Shri Krishna Namadi Nabhaved Grayamindriyai Sevan Mukhe Hi Jivado Svayam Eva Spuratyada. No one can understand the transcendental nature of the name, form, quality, and pastimes of Sri Krishna through his materially contaminated senses. So you may vibrate the sound of Krishna's name, but have you realized the transcendental quality of the name? This is not so easy. Well, I've spoken for about an hour, and I still haven't really gotten to the core of the 6th chapter. I wanted to give some introduction to sort of set it up and put the things in perspective. But I'm told I don't have to cover an entire chapter in 1 hour. And I'd like to thank Brajasundari for giving me a little bit of space. And sometimes some of these ideas about yoga and the Eightfold Path and disciplines, they sound a little bit dry, but I think in part, what I'm trying to do here is help people understand a little bit about the background and argument given in the Bhagavad Gita, so that devotees can feel a little more grounded in some of the philosophy that backs the conclusions of our acharyas. So that if somebody, I remember when I was a kid, every Saturday in a place in Los Angeles called Westwood, close to the University of California, there was a big theater where they debuted all the big new movies of the movie stars. And just across the street and down a ways, the devotees used to do kirtan. And in those days, the kirtan was this raging, thunderous kirtan with 6. This was the Los Angeles temple. We arrived there with 2 big school buses filled with devotees. There were about 50 devotees on each bus, one bus for the Matajis and the other bus for the Brahmacharis. So we were about 75, maybe 100 devotees, 5 or 6 drums, 25 pairs of kartals, completely back-shaved head, jumping up and down, screaming Hare Krishna at the top of our lungs for 2 hours. And it was quite a spectacle. But when I was before I joined the movement, I would walk down the street to go see a movie, and I would see these devotees and I would think, who are these people? They must be crazy. There's no doubt in my mind. A man shaves his head and wears a dress in the first place. In the second place, they're all jumping up and down and screaming. In the third place, they're banging on drums and cymbals. What is this? They must be crazy. But at the same time, there was something in me that attracted me. And I thought, I want to know more. Why would they do that? I have to talk to these people and discover, are they completely mad? And I would stop and talk to a devotee, and they would begin giving me the philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita. And I would go, well, that makes sense. Okay, I'm not this body. I get that. That makes sense. God exists. I like that. All right. And if God exists, what kind of, is he this old man with a beard who needs Viagra? No. He's this young, beautiful, blue figure playing a flute. I like the flute. I like the idea that transcendental sound is transmitted as a flute. In a sense, the Bhagavad Gita is transcendental sound, and it comes from the lips and tongue of Sri Krishna himself. So it's no different from the flute song of Krishna, the Gayatri Mantra, even though sometimes we find these arguments a little dry. But I was fascinated by that these people were not crazy. In fact, they had a really deep argument, and they gave me the Bhagavad Gita and they said, read this. And I was stunned. I thought, wait a minute. These people are all burned out, crazy hippies who took too much LSD and they ate mushrooms and smoked too much marijuana. And then they were hypnotized by some Svengali who told them to shave their heads and dance around in dresses. In those days, someone would approach you and tell you, hey, I have some really good hashish. You do? Yeah. Do you know what this hashish is? No. This is temple ball hashish. Temple ball? What do you mean? This is what the Hare Krishnas use. Oh, really? They smoke this? So when they smoke this, then they do that? Wow. But later I found out, no, that's not true. The Hare Krishnas do not smoke temple ball hash. You know, they're just high on the Hare Krishna mantra. And that used to be the preaching back in those days. They used to say, get high naturally, be happy naturally, chant Hare Krishna. And that appealed to me. So I think it's important that we understand the philosophy a little bit, even if it's a bit dry in places, just so that if somebody thinks you're absolutely mad, you don't eat meat, are you don't like hot dogs? Come on, aren't hot dogs delicious? Don't you just, my brother around Christmas time, he'll always say, yeah, but don't you just want to eat a delicious, juicy, red beef steak? And I'm like, no, no, I don't, you know, that's disgusting. Why would I do that? Kill a cow and then rip the flesh off his leg and then put that in my mouth? Why would I do that, you know? So, but people want to hear a little philosophy. And you can tell them, well, if you don't chant Hare Krishna, you're going to hell. And that's fine. But I think it's nice if you can engage people a little bit and be philosophical and say, well, you know, we have this book called the Bhagavad Gita. And, you know, here in this book, there's some old Sanskrit. It goes back, it's older than the Bible. And it says you should control your mind. Okay, do you have a problem with that? You know, it says you should avoid anger. Does that make you angry? Krishna says, don't be angry. Does that make you angry? So I love the Bhagavad Gita, and I'm trying to share it with you here according to my best understanding. I think it's a universal message. There's a story that Sridhar Maharaj used to like to tell, where he went to some village in Bengal. They had a festival, and a different preacher had been there the year before. And, you know, the Christians have a saying, to preach hell hot and sin black. That means you tell people sin is bad, sin is black, and hell is hot, and you're going to hell if you don't da, 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 da. So Sridhar Maharaj went to this village in Bengal, and the preacher before him was like that. He preached hell hot and sin black. He told people, chant Hare Krishna or die, you know, follow Srila Prabhupada or die. And the people didn't like that so much. So they told Srila Sridhar Maharaj, you know, we don't really want this kind of a festival here. You please go. And he said, well, give me a chance. Let me try. And they were like, well, okay, you can try. But that other preacher who was here, he was terrible. So Sridhar Maharaj gathered a group there and preached. And they loved him. And they said, can you please come back tomorrow? We want to hear more. Because his argument was sweet. His argument was beautiful and is. You can, often on Facebook, they post things from Sridhar Maharaj, and you can see it's very hard to disagree with what he says. And not only does it make sense, but it's very sweet and it's very comforting. So I'm not the preacher that Srila Sridhar Maharaj was in any sense, but maybe I learned something from him, and I'm trying to reflect that in our talks. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj was not afraid to expose the arguments of Buddha or Shankaracharya and others on the way to a deeper understanding. So here I talked a little bit about yoga, and next week, if we meet next week, I'll try to continue. So does anyone have any questions? I'll try to take questions.
Thank you very much, Prabhu. Of course, I hope we will meet next week. I hope so. As for me, I have a question about yoga. For example, in Hatha Yoga, we are training and focusing on our body. On Dhyana Yoga or meditation yoga, we are training our mind, focusing on a deity, for example, yes? In Karma Yoga, we are training our actions, activity. And I heard that during Kali Yoga, the fastest way to liberation is Bhakti Yoga. But what are we training in Bhakti Yoga? Mind, body, action, what exactly?
Okay, well, that's a very good question. You know, in some ways, because I'm trying to stick to the text of the Bhagavad Gita, I'm not talking about the specific practices of Bhakti Yoga, because it's not really given as part of the text. So I'm trying to be honest with the text so that in the future, if somebody looks at our talk, they don't say, oh, well, yeah, but wait a minute, we should do, so, you know, I don't want to feel like I'm cheating people by not giving them everything that's in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Our particular line comes from Sri Chaitanya. So Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has not written any books. He's given us the Shikshashtakam. The books were left to his followers. And among his followers, the best and most famous, of course, were the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan, Rupa, Sanatana, Raghunath Das, Raghunath Bhatta, Gopal Bhatta, and Jiva Goswami. Gopal Bhatta and Raghunath Bhatta we don't hear so much about, but Gopal Bhatta Goswami is really the person responsible for training Jiva Goswami. And Jiva Goswami gives us the Shat Sandarbhas, which are sort of bhakti philosophy more. Rupa Goswami and Sanatana Goswami give us works that are more of what we call a pancharatric nature. Pancharatra means rules and particular ways of acting. Okay, so among these, the most important would be the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and the Hari Bhakti Vilas. Hari Bhakti Vilas explains all about how to follow Ekadashi, how to practice the worship of the deity, whereas Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu describes the 64 different kinds of devotion or devotional service. And I was talking to an important devotee the other day, and he said, there's 64? You mean there's 64 different? Yeah. But basically, those 64 are included in the idea of Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atmani, Vedanam. So, and of those, Shravanam, especially Shravanam, Kirtanam, and Archan are important to us. So, deity worship, everything involved in, when you establish deities, then Krishna is living there on the premises. So you have to make sure he has food, he has water, he has a nice place. He has a nice place to sleep. He has a little bed, clothes, fresh flowers are offered. There's Mangal Arti, evening Arti. There's afternoon service, Bhog Arti. And then prasadam must be prepared and served to the deity. And then the bhoga must be appropriate. Like, for example, in Jagannath Puri, they will not offer tomatoes to Krishna because tomatoes come from Mexico. Right? So there are some things that are considered abominable to offer to the deity in Jagannath Puri. In Mexico, of course, they offer tomatoes. But whether tomatoes may or may not be offered to Krishna, that's a question for the guru. So the appropriate interpretation of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and Hari Bhakti Vilas is given to the guru who follows the acharya. So people will go to Sridhar Maharaj and ask, well, how is Ekadashi to be observed? And Sridhar Maharaj will give his opinion. And then we take that as doctrine and do our best to follow that. And if the devotees in Mexico ask Sridhar Maharaj, well, can we offer tomatoes? And Sridhar Maharaj says, what is a tomato? And then they show him, you know, he may say, yes, tomatoes may be offered. Srila Prabhupada, I saw a letter the other day where they're asking Srila Prabhupada, can we use tractors as farm machinery at New Vrindavan? And Srila Prabhupada says, yes, we have nothing against machines. If the purpose of the tractor is to farm the land, then why not? If you're growing rice on the land, rice can be offered to Krishna, and if the tractor is the best way to do it, go ahead and use a tractor. Okay, now a tractor uses gasoline. Gasoline is very karmic, but if that's all being offered to Krishna, then why not, right? So all these different sorts of adjustments, Srila Sridhar Maharaj used to say, religion means proper adjustment. So how to adjust karma and dhyan properly, that's the business of the guru. So we've been told, in terms of meditation, chant the holy name of Krishna. Kirtan is an open form of inviting everyone to participate in the holy name of Krishna. Japa is a private meditation. And when more confidential servant of your guru, then the practice of japa is followed by taking the Gayatri Mantra 3 times daily. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj has explained what is the appropriate meditation for the Gayatri Mantra. The Gayatri Mantra is a way of focusing the mind on the different kinds of vision that a Gaudiya Vaishnava has in terms of Guru, Sri Chaitanya, Krishna, and ultimately Radha and Krishna and the gopis. That's all in the Gayatri Mantra. So if you're meditating on that 3 times daily, that's a practice for the mind. In terms of what karmic activity is appropriate, then we consult with the Guru, and Guru Dev will say, well, at this time we need money to build the Samadhi Mandir for Srila Sridhar Maharaj or Govinda Maharaj. And we need bricks, but I can't send a brick from California or Mexico. I can send some money. So then my business becomes, how do I make money in an ethical way? I don't want to make money in an unethical way. I don't think, right? We can go out with a gun and a dagger and collect money for Krishna with a gun. But that's really activity in the mode of darkness. We don't want to do that. That's been done, but you don't want to sell drugs and then give 10% of the profit to Krishna. It can be done. Just as the sun can dry urine from a dirty place, Krishna can make transcendental any kind of activity that's offered. But as sadhus, we don't want to engage in activities that are tamasic or in the mode of darkness. So, karmically speaking, we try to involve ourselves in activities that will not contaminate our mind. I think that's sort of where you're going, right? Does that answer your question?
Yes. Yes.
So, right. So, karmically speaking, say you're a kindergarten teacher and you're teaching children to read. I think that is karmically less in the mode of darkness than working in a cigarette factory. There's an interesting letter that Prabhupada wrote to Hansaduta Prabhu when he was running the mission in Germany, where Hansaduta says, we tried going into the street and selling incense, but that didn't work because the German government stopped us. And they say, you cannot do that. You need permits, you need all these different things. We couldn't do that. So now the devotees had to get a job. And Prabhupada wanted to know, well, what kind of job are they doing? And he said, they're working in a cigarette factory. So can the devotees work in a cigarette factory, Prabhupada? And Prabhupada said, no, this is not a proper activity for my sadhus to engage in. They should not work in a cigarette factory. Find something else. So between farm machinery being cool and working in a cigarette factory being uncool, you can try to calculate how to position your karmic activity. But above karmic activity, there's devotional service. So How can you do devotional service? If someone is in the temple polishing the altar, and that's their service, every day they clean the altar, that's very nice. But if you're working to buy the boga so the pujari has something to eat while he's cleaning the altar, that's good too. That's also devotional service. So you can't say that's not devotional service. Right? What your particular service is, it's good to consult with your Gurudev. Now, for some of us, Gurudev isn't here anymore. My guru was Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. After him, my guru was Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Dev Goswami. After him, I took advice and orders from Govinda Maharaj for a while. Govinda Maharaj isn't here anymore. So we're orphans, right? Mommy and daddy are gone. You know, where's my guru? Yeanilo Premadana, you know? Where is Rupa Goswami? Where is Rup Damodar? Where is Gurudev? Where's Narottam Das? Where's Lochan Das? They're not here. So then you have to look in your heart and think, what would Sridhar Maharaj say if he saw me doing this? Would he just kind of chuckle and go, well, those are the Western devotees, that's what they do? Or would he be shocked? I saw him shocked on a couple of occasions. There was one devotee, for example, who he was reading the scripture, but in order to read the scripture, he took a candle and lit the candle and put some wax on top of a book, right? He put the candle wax on the surface of the book and then planted the candle into the wax and used that to read the Bhagavatam. And Sridhar Maharaj he shook his head. He couldn't believe that anybody would do something so abominable. Or in another case, a devotee is packing his bags to leave, and in his bag, he puts his dirty sandals, and then somebody gives him a book, and then he puts the book on top of the dirty sandals in the book. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj was like, God, you know, ouch, why did they do that? You know, and we asked him about putting a photo of Krishna on the cover of a book. And he said, no, because they may put their ashtray with their cigarette there. But, you know, he's thinking, well, maybe those devotees like to smoke cigarettes. Sridhar Maharaj was very liberal. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was very strict, you know, but sometimes even he was very liberal. So exactly what is the best sort of karmic activity for you to engage in while you're trying to be a good yogi and a good devotee? That's not my business to try to tell people. It's enough that I'm trying to explain Bhagavad Gita. So my own life, I work as a teacher online. So I sit here in this room and teach people how to speak English. But maybe that's not good. Maybe English is the language of the conqueror. It's an imperialistic conspiracy. But I'm very, very, part of my service is trying to speak something on the Bhagavad Gita. So I like to think this is devotional service. Perhaps that's only an illusion.
Thank you. We have one more question, but it is not about the 6th chapter. It is about the 4th chapter. So shall I read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So the question is about the verse 4 26. The verse is,
Yeah.
some offer their senses of hearing, touching, seeing, tasting, and smelling into the fires of self-control. Yet others offer their senses objects of sound, touch, form, taste, and smell into the fire of the senses. And the question is, how to understand that the householders, grihasthas, yes, offer the objects of the senses as a sacrifice to the fire of the senses. This means that by giving away the objects of the senses which the senses actually want to get, the householder makes a sacrifice.
I know the verse, but I don't understand the question.
The question is, I will try again. Does this mean that by giving the object of the senses to the fire of the senses, the householder makes a sacrifice or not? Because in the verse it is said that we need to give the object of the senses to the fire of the senses. So what the fire of the senses is? I don't know how to.
I'm thinking.
Okay.
Give me a moment.
Okay. So you understand? Okay.
Yeah, I don't really understand the question, but it's Shrotradin Indriyanyanye Sangyam Agnishu Juvati Shabdanin Vishayan Anya Indriyagnishu Juvati. So it says here, some, right? It doesn't say anything about brahmacharis or grihastas in the verse, right? It says some sacrifice the hearing process and senses into the fire of mental control. Others sacrifice the objects of the senses in the fire of the senses. Well, this is metaphoric. What does it mean, fire, right? Well, when there is a sacrifice, there's a fire, and you offer something into the fire, normally ghee nowadays. So this is this interpretation about brahmacharis and grihastas that comes from the commentary of Baladev Vidyabhushan, okay? And he interprets Shrotrad in Indriyani as being the brahmacharis and Shabda Adin as being the grihastas. And he says like this, his translation goes like this. The Naishtiki brahmacharis offer the senses into the control of the senses. The householders offer the sense objects into the fire of the senses. So that's the translation that you read, right? It says, Baladev's commentary, he says the brahmacharis offer the senses such as the ear into the fire of processes for controlling each sense. Stopping the senses, they're recognized as preeminent practitioners of sense control. Others, the householders, offer the sense objects such as sound into the senses such as the ear, which is regarded as a fire. They absorb themselves in this practice of experiencing the sense objects without attachment. Well, that doesn't help. I don't really understand that translation either. But I think you might say like this, that the brahmacharis normally, they don't have any possessions. Their only possession is themselves. So when they offer what they hear, it's done as a more mental practice. And when the householders offer sense objects, it's more of a physical practice. In other words, the householders have something to offer. They have physical things that they can give. The brahmacharis have only mental things to give. So both of them offer the senses into the fire of the senses. Brahmacharis offer the senses into the control of the senses. The idea is that both of these are offering what they have into the fire as a kind of sacrifice. The subtle distinction being made here about the senses and the fire of the senses, I'm not really sure. Srila Prabhupada comments. He says the members of the four divisions of human life are all meant to become perfect yogis. And then he says, well, human life is not meant for sense gratification. Brahmacharis, under the care of a guru, they control their mind by abstaining from sense gratification and hear only words concerning Krishna consciousness. Householders have some license for sense gratification and perform these acts with great restraint. Restricted, controlled life and householder life is a kind of sacrifice. But that explanation doesn't really explain perfectly. So this language is a bit metaphoric. You know, let me take a look at, give me a moment here. This is kind of an interesting question. Let me take a look at a different commentary. I have the commentary of Bhakti Pradeep Tirtha, who was a disciple of Bhakti Vinod and Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. Let me just see if he has anything a little bit more distinct to offer. But since I'm trying to give a summary of each chapter, I'm not getting into the deep esoteric meaning of every verse. That's a very interesting verse. I would like to ask Sridhar Maharaj about it, but he's not here with me. Let me see. That's 421. I think the general meaning of that is that
actually, it is 426.
426. I think the general meaning of that is that whether you're a brahmachari or whether you're a grihasta, you must try to offer your actions, and not just your actions, but also your physical senses, and not just the senses, but the internal aspect of the senses. Everything should be offered in the fire of sacrifice. In other words, should be purified through being offered to Krishna. Let me just see what does, here we are. Bhakti Pradeep Tirtha, what does he say about this? Okay. Yeah, I saw this as I was going through here. He says like this. Anye, here he translated as lifelong celibates or brahmacharis. He says, some, the lifelong celibates, brahmacharis, perform oma, which is our word for sacrifice, which means to give something to the gods, by offering their senses as sacrificial ghee to the fire of self-control, while the householders perform oma by offering their sense percepts, such as sound, taste, smell, sight, touch, to the fire of their senses. And there's no comment on that. He comments on this in this section. He's talking about sacrifice. So he says a yogi is an avowed performer of brahmajagya, and brahmajagya means the faithful discharge of ordained duties so far as they contribute to the pleasure of Vishnu. And the revelation of transcendence in matter is called Brahman, which is the effulgence of, or halo of my divine form. The principle of transcendence is quite different from the phenomenal world. When the constituents of Jagya, offering sacrificial ghee, fire, sacrificial priests, and the fruits thereof, are meant for the revelation of transcendence, perfect Jagya follows. When one is deeply absorbed in concentrated meditation, seeking of revelation of Brahman in his karma, his actions are called as Brahmajagya. Okay, so that a yogi is an avowed performer of Brahmajagya, and Jagya varies according to the different mentalities of the yogis. So there are as many Jagyas as there are yogis. Scientifically differentiated, and the word Jagya again is sacrifice or giving of oneself. All Jagya is either karma or gyan. Now, I'll explain about the proceedings of some of these different Jagyas. And then he has that verse, the lifelong celibates perform Jagya by offering their senses, where the grihastas perform Jagya by offering their sense percepts. So the difference here is between senses and the objects of sense gratification, vishaya, right? So because the brahmacharis, I suppose, are not involved in vishaya or sense gratification, they're not sacrificing their vishaya, they're sacrificing the hearing process itself, whereas the grihastas are sacrificing their vishaya or sense gratification. So Prabhupada, in his comment, he says, he makes the point that householders, they have some license for sense gratification, but they perform these acts with great restraint. Whereas the brahmacharis, they really don't have a license for sense gratification. So they're offering the very sense itself. That's the best I can do. I would have to think about that to get more deeply into the meaning of that verse.
Yes, thank you. Pranashish Prabhu sent to the chat some shlokas, but actually I think that these are simply this proper shloka. It is in Sanskrit and in English. And the person who asked the question, he said that, yes, the question is about what is the fire of senses?
Okay, that's a good question, right?
Yes.
So
Okay.
the verse mentions Agni, fire, but the word Jagya, which is, again, I suppose, maybe a difficult word to translate. Jagya is translated here as sacrifice. Sacrifice in English means to make something sacred by giving it to God. In India, there is a fire, and the fire represents the tongue of God through which he can eat. Of course, there's a separate God called Agni, who is the God of fire. And in this verse, the word Agni is mentioned. So you have these two words, Jagya and Agni. Now, Agni is a god, the god of fire. We respect the god of fire, so when you light a match, you don't blow on the match because your breath is dirty and offensive. If you have an incense stick and you light the incense, don't blow on it because your breath is contaminated. You have to wave it until the fire returns to the air. Jagya is also a name for Vishnu. Okay? So the question is, you're offering something into the fire. What does that mean? How can you offer your senses into the fire? Well, since fire metaphorically represents God, what the important of the verse is, give something to God. So the brahmacharis are giving the very possibility of perception back to God. The householders, being more sensually involved, give the object of the senses to God. So if I see something beautiful, I offer that vision back to God. If I hear some beautiful music, I know that Raso Vaisa, Krishna is the origin of everything beautiful. So I know that that beauty comes from God and I offer it back to God. Those are the objects of the senses, or Vishaya. Whereas the brahmachari offers the very sensual ability to perceive beauty to God, even before he has a perception, even before there's a phenomenological perception of beauty, the very sense is offered to God. So maybe that's a higher level of transcendental vision. The vision itself before, the possibility of vision is being offered to God. In the case of the brahmachari, in the case of the householder, the vision itself is being offered to God. It's a very fine distinction, but the point that's being made is that the perfection of karma yoga will be seen when all of our actions, all of our perceptions, everything that we can feel or see is offered to God as an offering. You can look at the word sacrifice as offering.
Sorry. It is written here that the person who asked the question, he is thinking that maybe this verse is connected with that the Lord, he is like a supreme enjoyer, and so when object of the senses are touching the senses, there is like an enjoyment, yes? And so every time Grihastka should remember about it. Maybe this is the meaning.
That's very good. I like that. Right. Vishaya also means enjoyment, right? So as the enjoyer, all enjoyment is his. So the grihastas, they offer the enjoyment back to the enjoyer. And the brahmacharis offer the sense back to the sensualist. In any case, the purport of the 4th chapter is about offering oneself. So we should try to see how that verse fits in. But yes, that's very good, very perceptive. All right. Anything else?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't see any more questions. Thank you very much for this very, very interesting talk. I hope that we will see you next week. And here also Dandi Maharaj with us is Jai, our obeisances.
All right.
So,
at your service. Well, thank you very much. I see Dandi Maharaj is here. Satyabama Didi está conectando desde Morelia en el corazón de Mexico. There's Nadia Priya, Haribol. Suvasini is with us. I owe you a phone call. I'll call you soon. Praneshwari in, I guess it's Florida, isn't it? Looks like you're enjoying beautiful weather there in Florida. Harimati and Tungaras Dasi Ananta Shesh is with us. Desde España. And Madhavi Lata from Odessa. R.M. Das. Hare Krishna Lilavati. Hare Krishna to everyone. Thank you very much. It's very kind of you to offer me the chance to speak and give me a little inspiration, and I'll try to have something more on the 6th chapter next week. All right. Gaura Haribol and Jaya Bhaktavrinda. Bhaktavrinda ki jai. Bhaktavrinda ki jai ho.
Jai. Right. Thank you very much. And Jai. Sripad Mahayogi Prabhu ki jai.
Peace and
Thank
love.
you very much. Hare Krishna. Please accept our obeisances. See you, I hope see you next week, and Mahayogi Prabhu will continue to speak about the 6th chapter. Thank you. Bye-bye. Dandavats.